Is there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. Today we bring you an interview with Dr. Victoria Clark. Victoria has worked as the East Asia Assessment Development Manager for the British Council based in Hong Kong. Her field of expertise is the assessment of English as a second and foreign language, with her research interests including performance-based testing, teaching and assessing writing, the validity of speaking tests, and task complexity. She's published several books on General English Proficiency test preparation and is an experienced conference speaker. Matthew spoke with Victoria at the 53rd RELC International Conference that took place in Singapore earlier this spring. In the interview, Matthew asked questions to Victoria about her work in language assessment development and about the area of interest more broadly.
Okay, so I'm here at the 53rd RELC International Conference, and I'm very happy to be sitting with Dr. Victoria Clark. Vicky is okay?
Vicky's fine.
Okay, great. So you are here as one of the invited speakers.
Correct.
And your position is with the British Council?
That's correct.
Correct. So maybe just to start things off, could you give us maybe just a brief career history and how you ended up where you are now?
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. Studied applied languages at university and left university with a degree and masters in applied languages. And then basically I went straight into TEFL. I became a TEFL teacher in Germany. And then after a while I moved from Germany to Holland, still teaching. And then to Taiwan, where I moved into teacher training and director of studies. And I started working with Cambridge exams in Taiwan. And I think that's where my interest in language testing actually stemmed from, because we were working not only on the administration of Cambridge exams, so the CET, PET, FCE, CAE, CPE, but also we worked with teachers in making sure they had the correct books to assist the students to prepare, that they understood the methodology, that they were able to teach from those books, and then obviously, very crucial, the administration and invigilation of the test. And I was also the all-examiner for Cambridge. So it was really sort of a end-to-end solution for schools in improving the proficiency of their students. At the same time, I was approached by a Taiwanese company, the Language Training and Testing Center in Taiwan, to write items for their General English Proficiency test. I'd never done that before. So I thought I'd give it a go. Went out, bought a book on testing, how to write tests, read it over the weekend, and designed a couple of probably very poorly designed test items. They ended up giving me a full-time job and some training, and then that was it. A couple of weeks into that position, and with Cyril Weir, Professor Cyril Weir, as the consultant at the time for the Taiwanese General English Proficiency test, hearing him speak for a couple of hours on test specifications really changed my entire career path. I ended up then restudying, going back, doing another master's with a focus on assessment, TEFL and assessment, and obviously then my PhD in language assessment. And I've ended up at the British Council, and my job in the British Council is Assessment Development Manager. So we work around the region in East Asia, work with governments and universities. We work on assessment literacy projects. We help design, develop tests. We're here for consultation on assessment reform and language education reform. We also work on accountability when there's teacher training programs to ensure they have the right test for the right purpose. So we do loads of work with varied stakeholders, right from, let's say, teachers in rural Myanmar, helping them to test their English and to design classroom-based assessments, right through to, at the moment, we have projects in Vietnam designing tests for vocational students at universities, both General English and Occupational English. We are working in Japan on a speaking test for university entrance and exit, which we've just started, we're very excited about. We work in multiple countries on assessment projects. We organise conferences around the region and around the world in language testing conferences. So very varied work with varied stakeholders, from the teachers right through to the Ministry of Education.
Okay, well, sounds great. And you're based in Hong Kong?
I'm based in Hong Kong, that's correct, yeah.
Okay, nice. So maybe just going back to your time in Taiwan, which is maybe where you said you got started.
Absolutely.
And first got interested in testing. And also you said you could see like kind of the full, both all ends of it in terms of,
absolutely.
from the teaching to the
the end-to-end solutions, yes.
So what do you think attracted you, or what do you think, what suits somebody to being, to getting involved in the assessment side of language teaching?
I think it was suddenly the realisation, having spent a few weeks, a few months working predominantly on testing, then obviously reading about it and listening to probably one of the world's most famous testers, Cyril Weir, I suddenly clicked that how on earth did I do my job as a teacher without this knowledge? How am I so ignorant about something which is so important? I think teachers, we know how to teach, and I would have been cocky enough, I think, in those days to say I was a good teacher, but without having any evidence as to my students' learning progression or the effectiveness of my own teaching, or even understanding what my students were going to have to do in terms of tests later in life to prepare them for that, or even understanding what they need to do outside of my classroom or test room. I think it was a sudden realisation that this was a whole area that I had so little knowledge about, but was, for me, the most important area. Testing is high stakes in many countries, but it can also, an assessment itself, whether it be classroom-based, has such vital importance to the work as teachers, and obviously to our students, to the parents. It's politically sensitive. A new test in a country may bring people out onto the streets, front page of newspapers. Testing really is such a huge issue. It's a complex task. It involves a lot of skills and knowledge and competencies. It's fascinating. Designing a reading test, for example, is fascinating. What is reading? What are the skills? What do I need to include? How do I differentiate levels? How do I ensure that they're actually doing what I want them to do in the test? Are they really skimming and scanning? Are they really reading for detail? How do I make sure the distractors are not too easy? So hundreds and thousands of questions that, slowly I began to get answered over my career. And I still find it fascinating because it's a relatively new field. Our first testing book was really 1961 by Robert Lardo, although our first teaching language book was around about 1790 something, even though teaching English has been around since about the 15th, 16th century. Our first textbooks were in the late 17th century, late 18th century, but testing only really got its day in 50 minutes of fame starting from 1961. So relatively new, changing constantly, and ultimately, if we design good tests, this can have an incredible impact on the teaching and learning. An indirect test of English will lead to people who do not speak or use English. It is going to disadvantage the student professionally, educationally, and socially. So for us, it's more than just an interesting job. We feel it has implications for, especially with the British Council and our aim to empower young people around the world for better opportunities. Good English tests will have a positive washback, so they'll be able to use English to really, have good opportunities later.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that most teachers underestimate the importance of assessment?
I would go a little bit further and say teachers fear assessment. I think there are two issues here. I think we are often as teachers very defensive because we are pretty good teachers, most of us. We've done many years in the field. And to be really sort of caught out on what we don't know, I think teachers are very defensive. If I ask teachers to show me their tests, I get a very negative reaction. They don't want to share their tests with me. They assume I'm a testing expert and therefore would critique the test because they know they haven't done the test on principles or perhaps they've just cut and paste from the internet or taken from an old textbook. They're very defensive. Also, in their defence, and as when I was a teacher and learning testing, books on testing are over-jargoned, over-complicated, and I don't know who they're written by, a lot of them, because I find even now when I approach a testing textbook or introduction to testing, I find so many of them really out of the reach of teachers who are interested in learning testing for the first time. So I think us testers ourselves are guilty of perhaps making it elite club, the one percenters, if you wish, and that needs to change. Part of our mission in the British Council is to bring assessment literacy, which we believe is a professional duty for teachers, and to translate that message into something that teachers, parents, students can understand. So that's one of our missions, and part of my work in the region as well as assessment literacy. Okay. So I think teachers are a little bit frightened, and we have perhaps we don't quite understand what testing is. We see statistics and God knows what else, and we all get very frightened of those sort of things, and they look very boring. But in fact, it's a lot of really interesting discussions, testing, about what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, how it links back to what we want them to do outside. So it's really, for good language teachers, talking about testing is taking everything they know about teaching and the subject and their students and English and putting it all together. So for me, it's something that teachers shouldn't shy away from, but I do understand the fear and also the time that they may not have to study it properly.
The TEFLologists have written a book, Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, details the emergence of the podcast as a tool for professional development, engagement, and personal investment, as well as providing a guide to setting up your own podcast. Featuring a foreword by Thomas Farrell, this is the first book written for language teachers hoping to make connections between the podcasting medium and their own professional development. Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, is released by the independent publishing collective The Round, which has produced ebooks by Scott Thornbury, Nikki Hockley, Lindsay Clanfield, and many others. For a full list of titles, visit theround.com. Podcasting and Professional Development, a guide for English language teachers, is available on The Round and directly through Amazon, and all profits from sales will go back into producing the TEFLology Podcast. Pick up a copy and support the show.
So you mentioned that one of your missions with the council is maybe to help develop teachers' assessment literacy. What are some ways that you can do
we're
that?
working at the moment on a MOOC,
Okay.
and that will be open to everyone sometime this year. That will be on assessment literacy for teachers. We also have on our British Council website, if you search for British Council and Assessment Literacy Project, we have a series of really good interactive, fun 5-minute cartoons for teachers and teacher trainer as the target audience about various aspects of language assessment, like assessing reading or the CFR or computer-based assessment or validity. And they're very easy to understand. Most of these cartoons, if not all at this moment, have worksheets that teachers can use for their own, pre, during and post cartoon work, or they can use for themselves or in their classes. So we're working on that. We're also looking at various other options in terms of perhaps other online courses, etc., where we can bring our message around assessment literacy to the wider audience.
Yeah, great. Could you maybe talk a little bit about some of the changes in assessment you've seen since you first got involved in Taiwan?
Yeah, I think first of all, some of the change in assessment is the understanding by stakeholders of the need for direct language testing. When I mean direct language testing, I mean tests of actual speaking. We actually get the test taker to speak. And tests of writing where they have to actually write, not have multiple choices as to which error in the sentence error, or those sort of questions that unfortunately still exist in quite a few tests. For us, what's necessary is that people now understand that if we have tasks in our tests which resemble more accurately the tasks they will need to actually perform outside of the test room, outside of the classroom, then we will be able to prepare our students better for the real world and to use English effectively. There's a big difference between English usage and testing that's grammar and vocabulary, and testing English use, the ability to communicate in different contexts with different audiences, with using all your linguistic repertoire at different, obviously, proficiency levels. So first, I think there's an understanding that direct testing is necessary so that we can leave school or university and be able to write emails, talk to people, go on holiday. There's also, with testing, there's also the understanding that teachers need to be better at productive skills, not only in their own proficiency but in their own teaching of productive skills. So I think, and that's obviously led to parents being more demanding as to their teachers' proficiency and skills in speaking and writing, because they want their children to actually speak in class. And I find when I meet parents of young children and they know I'm from the British Council, they always get their child to speak to me. They're proud of the fact their student can say, "Hi, how are you?" And then I ask, did they have fun at school? And they can answer. The parents are proud. That's what they want, a child to be able to speak to a native speaker or non-native speaker in English. So that's the first thing I've noticed. The second thing I've noticed is, I think, the reality that testing is very sensitive. Imposing new tests, they did an excellent job in Taiwan. They basically implemented a 4-skill direct test. And it did initially have a lot of complaints from, obviously, the teachers were frightened, the parents were frightened that their children would fail because they wouldn't talk properly initially. But I think there's an understanding that when we design tests, develop tests, communications around tests, and having materials and documents for various stakeholders to explain better what the test is about and to alleviate fears, to make it clear, that's improved a lot. So we in the British Council believe transparency in test design and development is essential, which is why we have published all our test specifications and our technical manuals for the aptitude test, so that you can, and all our validity studies, so you can actually delve in and see how we started to design the test, what was our thinking, how is it linked to the CFR, how did we do that, what do the test specs look like, how did we train our item writers. So from that side, we feel that's essential to help stakeholders understand our tests, have faith and trust our tests, and therefore, we can actually help to relieve the anxiety that teachers, students, parents, schools may have when tests are actually administered in their organisations.
You talked earlier about classroom-based assessment.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about maybe the differences in the principles you might apply to designing classroom-based assessment versus a more formal test?
There are very different contexts. Obviously, with formal traditional tests, whether it be pen and paper or, let's say, computer-based, there are clearly questions around validity and reliability. In other words, we would, going back to that transparency, we have to make sure that when we design high-stakes testing, that the validity there's evidence of validity and studies around, empirical studies on the validity of our test, and that reliability in terms of how we ensure consistency of administration, consistency of scoring, etc. In classroom-based testing, sometimes it's within an individual class, and therefore the context is very different. You don't need that body of evidence. What you do need, and which is similar, is understanding that the concepts that we apply to formal testing, i.e. validity, reliability, practicality, relevance, usefulness, still actually apply to the classroom. If your assessment is not of a quality, then the information you get from the assessment in class is not going to be well informed, and then the decisions you make on that are, again, not informed. So, to be honest, pointless doing the assessment in the first place. So, understanding what makes a test, or to what extent can we help our assessments in class become more valid? In other words, are we measuring what we think we're measuring? When we interpret the data or the results from our assessment, are they appropriate? And do we use the test for the correct purposes? So the concepts are not different, but the applications of that in real life. Obviously, you're not going to do statistical testing of item analysis and item discrimination for a classroom test, but piloting to see if those you assumed would do well actually did well, and the lowest in the class didn't get higher grades than the best in the class. So perhaps small piloting and sharing with colleagues, and making sure the easy tasks go first, so it's less stressful for those with limited proficiency. So there are certain strategies that you can employ, that we employ in formal testing within the classroom. Obviously, not so extreme, clearly, but the concepts themselves should be there. And even designing classroom tests, in the test development process, where we have planning, specifications, item writing, obviously review, revision, quality control, piloting, etc., all of these can be done in the classroom as well. Now, we may take 2 years to design a test to live administration in formal testing, but this could be within a week or so in classroom-based. We shouldn't really miss any of those steps in the test design development process, but we just can do them, on the back of an A4 piece of paper on the bus. If you want to think about what specs, the blueprint for your test, your design at the end of the year for assessment of learning in the class. So with classroom-based assessment, I think it's clearly different context, different type of information and purpose we're trying to elicit and use it for, but there are many notions of testing and aspects of testing that we use in formal high stakes that can be applied and should be, just in a different manner.
So basically, like those issues of validity and reliability,
absolutely,
no matter what, if there's assessment involved, you have to apply this.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, with validity, if you look on our websites, not just for us, but obviously other testing organisations like the ETS, you'll find a whole body of research done so we can obviously show that we have theoretical and empirical justifications for inferences and uses of our tests. But even in the classroom-based, I would like to see, a piece of paper to say what you think you're testing, a piece of paper to see what your thinking was, how that would look like in your assessment, and what assessment method you might use and why. And I would like to see a little blueprint, a little draft of that to see how it links back, and then perhaps a little pilot. So there's very little difference in that sense. To the principles, it's just the application of how we might do that in reality.
Yeah.
That's all.
Great. Okay, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so maybe we'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you again.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening today, and we'd like to say a huge thank you to Victoria Clark for her time. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can send us an email at TEFLology@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and also listen to our previous episodes on YouTube and our WordPress site, TEFLology-podcast.com. So thanks again for listening, and we'll be back again soon.